Hello, everyone, and welcome back to TTRPG Talk. I'm rjcurrer, your host, as always. And first off, Happy New Year to most of us using the Gregorian calendar. So, if you use the Gregorian calendar, the for most of us, it's the beginning of the new year, and that got me thinking about beginnings this year, or today, I should say. It, so that kind of put me in the mind of starting new things, of where do you begin, where do you jump off with a new campaign, and that of course led me to the idea of a session zero. So for today's chat, I thought maybe we would talk a little bit about my thoughts on session zeros, how I run them, how I recommend other people run them. I've gone through a number of iterations of this over the years, and have mercifully had the opportunity to run dozens and dozens of session zeros as I've started new campaigns, and sort of reframed others and that sort of thing. And so I thought that maybe today we could talk a little bit about that. One little side note before we begin, and this is maybe a moment of me kind of patting myself on the back, but today our channel is 1 year old. So thank you so much, everybody who's been here, has been watching these videos and making this possible. I'm looking forward to doing more of this in 2025, but it feels really good to have gotten to spend the last year with you all, making adventures and doing these live streams. So thank you again for all of your support. It really, really means a lot to me. All right. Well, without further ado, let's talk about session zeros. So, first off, a session zero in sort of my nomenclature, and I think probably the most widely accepted nomenclature is it's a session that you do before the beginning of a new campaign of any TTRPG. But for purposes today, we'll probably talk a little bit more about D&D. But think of it as sort of your primer. You're laying expectations, you're doing the groundwork to kind of have a really fun, enjoyable campaign. Um, so, as always, I want to hear your feedback as we kind of go through this, but I have sort of four areas within a session zero that I like to hit, and I mix and match these because not every session zero needs all of these. Not every game needs all of these. I will tell you that I do session zeros even before like one shots. I'll do a mini session zero just to kind of calibrate everybody, get everybody on the same page. And then I'll do a full session zero at the beginning of a campaign. Some of this gets adjusted based off of how well the people who are there know each other. If you're playing with a bunch of friends who've played together a lot, some of the stuff goes faster, some of the stuff we don't need as much of. As opposed to playing with a group of newbies or people who don't know each other very well. So, the first section that I kind of follow in with is introductions, right? And so this is going to be important if you have players who don't know each other or if you're unfamiliar with the players. Um, this is important if you've got a group of new people coming together who really haven't gotten to know each other. It's also useful if you have a group of people who do know each other, but you're playing like a one shot and everybody's already got their characters generated. And introductions are pretty straightforward. I generally ask people to provide me with their name, their preferred name, what do they like to be called, preferred pronouns for themselves and for their characters. Uh, Give me a little bit of experience with their history with D&D if I haven't played with them before, or whatever TTRPG we're playing. Um, and then if we're doing a one shot where people already have their characters developed, then I'll ask them to do a quick introduction to their character. Name, species, background, their class, that kind of stuff. Just a couple sentences, just so that everybody's kind of on the same page of who everybody is and what they're playing. Um, I know people who will like to do icebreakers during the introductions. I generally don't. Just a quick little blurb about ourselves is usually enough for what I'm going for. But if you find that you've got a really good icebreaker, something that kind of really gets people energized and talkative, then that's an excellent thing to throw in when you're doing your kind of your introductions. So the introductions always come first. If we're working with a new group who's made, or a established group who's already made characters and is needs to introduce that character, that kind of deal. Um, we already got a comment in the chat here. M Solaki says, "Hey man, well, hey, good to see you here. I'm glad that you're joining us today. Thanks for joining us." So back to what I was saying. Our introductions come first, right? Makes sense. The second thing that I like to do is talk about what I call my how I run my game section. And really, this is a primer of sort of my expectations of what I expect from my players and what they can expect from me. It's not so much, a monologue about how games should be run or my methodology for all of that. It's not a deep dive into that. It's more of me setting expectations and knowing what sort of standards I'm gonna hold myself to as I run the game. So things like I'll talk about, I'm a rules is written kind of DM, and that, I'm gonna be following the rules in the rule book, and I expect the players to, follow those rules too, but that I also expect them to hold me to the rules because I'm not always right. So if I make a call that, doesn't jive with something that's on their character sheet, hey, call me out on that kind of thing. And that's my style. That doesn't have to be your style. Um, you might be more of a rule of cool DM, which is great. That's another really awesome approach there. And this is a good time to just kind of talk about that, and kind of throw that out there. Give players sort of that, um, uh, you know, how to interact with you during what are you going to expect from them if they, you know, should they justify their actions? Can they ask you questions about, well, is there, something I could do, my character could do to figure out X, Y, or Z, that kind of stuff. Just give them a sentence or two sort of about how to interact with you as the DM so that they don't feel like they can't ask questions, or maybe, you have a specific way you want them to approach things, like, hey, we're always talking in character, or you got to do a hand sign if you're talking out of character. I've seen some tables that do that kind of stuff, but this is a good place to kind of lay all that kind of stuff out. I also talk about dice rules with this. If we're playing on a virtual tabletop, am I going to expect players to roll the dice there? Is physical dice okay? You know, that kind of stuff. One thing that I have found really useful at this point is to kind of remind people that we're all adults here to have fun, and that part of that involves, reporting dice rolls honestly and knowing that I trust them to report their dice rolls honestly, as they can trust me to report mine honestly, that kind of stuff. That I trust them that if they need to get up and use the restroom, that they just get up and use the restroom. They don't have to raise their hand or ask for permission or necessarily wait for established bio breaks, that kind of thing. Same thing if they want to refill their drinks. I just find that if you kind of remind people that that they are adults, not in a classroom, and that they can, modulate and manage themselves as necessary. I have found that that really kind of works really, really well, with my players, and kind of establishing that rapport, over the years. It seems like an odd sort of thing, but it's made a big difference. I have found at my tables when just remind people that we're adults there to have a good time. To that end, I also do like to sort of take that how I run my game moment to kind of talk about how we're going to break up sessions, when we're going to have bio breaks, that kind of stuff. To discuss, sort of, hey, we're going to do one every hour, we're going to do one in the middle. This is how long I expect them to take, that kind of stuff, so that people have that sort of little planning bit, so that they, if somebody's like, what, I really want to get up and refill my drink, but I don't want to miss anything just yet. When do we have a break coming up? If it's going to be a while, I'll jump up and do it now. If it's going to be soon, I'll wait, that kind of thing. They have that information to work with. And also letting people know that, they can give me feedback on all that kind of stuff during that kind of how I run my games, and how I want that feedback, whether it's in the moment or whether it's sort of during our debrief, or, you know, whether I want somebody to, I've never asked anybody to raise a hand, but you might say, hey, if they, to keep from interrupting you or something like that, if they might toss up a hand, and it gives you a cue that you want to chat with them. Kind of laying all of those expectations about how we're going to interact with each other at the table here is really a good approach at this sort of segment of your session zero. I find that this takes maybe about 15 minutes to kind of get through to really do that in depth. We got a comment here. It says, I'm planning a D&D campaign for the first time. I've been playing for a while, but never DM'd before. My players are new to the universe of D&D. Do you have any tips on how to introduce them to the game? I do. And in fact, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit here because that's kind of my fourth section of introducing people to a new campaign and new universe, or a fourth section of, I should say, my session 0, where I talk about introducing people to a new campaign, to a new universe. And I'll touch on a little bit there on how I handle brand new players as well. But absolutely, I will come back to answer that for you. Um, so yeah, so a little bit about kind of how I run my games, give them a little bit of summary about how to interact and my expectations of players and their expectations of me. And that's sort of part 2 of a session 0 for me. That's a part that I almost never leave out, even if I've played with people before. I might, if I'm running a new campaign for people I've played with a lot, I might give that a little bit of lip service where it's just kind of like, hey, it's going to be like we've always done before, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, I toss that in just as kind of a reminder for everybody on how we're going to run this kind of stuff. I mean, for an example, um, over the holidays, I ran a one shot for people that I've been playing D&D with every other week for 5 years now. And I still did a mini session 0 and still talked about how I'm going to run this game for them because it was a little bit different than how we run some of our other games too. So it's useful to kind of set that primer. The third one is safety tools. Now, safety tools are one of those things that I personally include in every single session 0, no matter what. Whether I've played with people a lot or I've never played with them at all, I always include a little blurb about safety tools in there, just because I want to remind people that they exist and that they can use them. Now, if I'm playing with people that I've played with a lot in the past, I won't necessarily go through the full, hey, here are my lines, here are my veils kind of thing, because I tend to use the lines and veils safety tool in there, as well as the X and O system. You might use other tools, and there's great. There's some great ones out there. The Monte Cook RPG checklist is an awesome one to use. The Deca Player Safety is a great one that I found recently that is super useful. You might make your own. I've made Google form surveys for this before and kind of sent all this stuff out ahead of time. All kinds of ways to approach this. But but for my safety tools, I like to go through them every single time, and it's been from sort of uh, you know sort of failing to do so and finding out the hard way that I really needed to do that, that I've come up with this. Because when you're playing with new people, it makes a lot of sense, right? You don't know what their boundaries are. You don't know what it is that they're concerned about, and you can't always just kind of guess that from people. Um, there are people, I've played games with people who are just don't want to have spiders in there at all. They have issues with spiders. They've got arachnophobia, that kind of deal. And it's not like that's, plastered on their face when you meet them. You wouldn't expect that kind of stuff. And spiders show up in D&D adventures. So sometimes having that information ahead of time is really useful because you don't want anyone to have a bad time. I've had people tell me things about their past, their personal history that are pretty intimate that would affect the kinds of things that might show up in a game, like being uncomfortable with, with characters being affected by exposure to the elements, stuff like that. Um, People who are uncomfortable with, small spaces for their characters, for claustrophobia, that kind of deal. All of that kind of stuff comes up during during the safety tools element. And for new players, people you've never played with before, it makes sense. You don't necessarily know that, but it's a good thing to do with your friends, people you have played with before, to kind of go through that thoroughly each time, because you might learn new things. There are games that I've run for people that I've been playing with for years, and then we ran a Curse of Strahd campaign, and I found out sort of some new things about the kinds of horror that people I'd known for years were comfortable with and weren't comfortable with that I had no idea. So it's useful to kind of work that in every time you are uh, every time you're running a new adventure to kind of go through those safety tools. And I've talked about different safety tools to use before in different videos, so I don't want to really kind of hammer that too much here. But I will mention that if you're new to safety tools, you've never used them before, I highly recommend you check out Lines and Veils, the X and O system. So that's, X is in X-ray, N is in November, O as in October um, system. The Monte Cook RPG checklist is another really good one, and then the Deck of Player Safety is another great one for in-person games. A little tougher to apply to virtual tabletops, but great for people who are playing in person. All good ones to check out. Um, when possible, I also recommend if you're going to do something like the Monte Cook RPG checklist, which is literally a PDF checklist, send it to people in advance. So they've got some time to think about it and kind of work their way through it. Um, I also like to sort of get that stuff collected in advance because it doesn't put people on the spot when they're at the table. It doesn't require them to suddenly, speak up about their deepest, darkest fears in front of potentially strangers, because who among us really wants to do that, right? It gets them sort of a place that they can privately list this stuff and send it to you, and it's just between you and them, and they don't have to fess up to the fact that they're the one who doesn't want to have spiders in the game or something along those lines. Um, you know, uh, so it just makes it a little more comfortable for everybody if you can do that, and get that kind of stuff knocked out ahead of time. So safety tools are something that I would say always, always, always use, no matter how long or short a game is going to be, or how well you know the players. But adjust, how deep you go into them based off of how much experience you have with an individual player or the individual players at your table for that game. So the last one that I want to talk about is section 4, and I call this one character creation. And this is where, frequently I'll go through sort of my session 0 stuff, and we'll talk about all this sort of stuff, and I'll ask questions throughout, and if anybody's got any questions and clarifying that kind of stuff. And then we get to section 4, and this is where I get to go, hey, now's the fun stuff. Now we're going to talk about character creation, because most of the time when I'm running a session 0, it is for a campaign, and the players have not come with their characters created yet, and that is intentional. People are very capable of making characters on their own, but I have found through experience that very frequently, especially when you're starting a campaign, just jumping in and making a character is a great way to get started. But your players are going to need more information about party composition, about the kind of world that they're playing in, if they're going to make a character that's going to be really satisfying for them to play over the course of a campaign. So I really like to do that together. Um, so when I'm doing the character creation segment, I do a little briefing about the background and the world that they're going to be in. I tell them if there's going to be a home base, kind of the environment they're starting in. I'll do things like, hey, the world you are in has a lot of forests. It has a lot of mountains. I'll give them a little bit of the environs. That way, you've got people who are playing rangers or druids, have something to kind of feed off of for that. I'll talk a little bit about the pantheons, what gods are in this world, that kind of deal, so that your paladins, your clerics have something to work with. I'll talk about if there's any established magical practices, any organizations, that kind of stuff that maybe our wizards or our sorcerers or warlocks might buy off of here. I'll certainly let players create some of that stuff if they have something in mind, but I'll kind of give them what we already know, sort of what's already established. I don't worry about giving them, pages and pages and pages of lore. I try to keep this to a pretty short, little bit, maybe, 2 to 3 minute kind of talk about this kind of stuff. If I've really had the time to prepare for this, um, and especially if I'm doing an in-person game, I might write up a one sheet, like a 1 page, 2 page summary of this information and kind of hand it out, so that they've got reference to it. If there's any lore that's just absolutely vital for them to know, I mean, like they can't create their character without it, then I will bring that up here. Otherwise, I'll bring it up in game. I'll mention it in the sort of my opening exposition, that kind of stuff, um, if necessary. Um, I don't worry about doing a lot of lore during this segment here unless it's absolutely vital. Um, if I've got new players, especially, and when I say new players in this context, I mean people who have never played whatever TTRPG I'm running before, um, I will adhere to sort of that, keep it simple sort of philosophy here, where less is better. The idea that, um, I'm going to give them the bare bones of information that they need to make their characters, and I'm going to elaborate on that in game as opposed to doing it at the session zero, or just because you don't want to overwhelm them with information. This is an instance where, if you have um, people who are brand new to the universe, the campaign setting that you're playing in, that kind of deal, a one sheet is super useful. Um, where really you're just outlining a little bit about, sort of their starting location, a little bit about the world. If politics are important, like they need to know there are three kingdoms, okay, that's a great place to put that. If they need to know about a couple key factions, a sentence or two about each of those, that's really useful. A little bit about the pantheon, a little bit about the overall environment they're in, and anything that their character would know right out the gate. Like, hey, you're starting already having accepted this job. You're on your way from Neverwinter to Phandalin because you've been hired by Gundren Rockseeker. If any of you are familiar with the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure, I mean, that's an easy thing to kind of lay on for people just kind of right out the gate, and include on your one sheet there, and it gives them the kind of information that they need. So I'd say, keep it simple when you're giving out your character information, or sort of that character creation information, and know that it's going to expand and it's going to grow as you play in the game. If you want some more information about how to introduce people who are brand new to the game, or brand new to a whatever TTRPG you're playing, I think it's my live stream just previous to this one, um, that I really dig deep into that, my approach on that. So that might be something worthwhile to check out if that's the boat you find yourself in. So I hope I answered your question on that one. I'm I'm Soliki. Um, Hopefully that you found that useful. Um, but those are my sort of 4 segments for session 0. And again, I will do a session 0 pretty much no matter what. I'll mix and match those segments as necessary, um, based off of how often I've played with these particular players, the length of the adventure we're going to play, because obviously you don't want to do a 2-hour session 0 for a 2-hour one shot. Um, and and then sort of base this off of whether it's going to be a one shot or a campaign, that kind of deal. How new and how experienced my players are, that kind of stuff. But I think that session 0 is absolutely invaluable for sort of setting the stage and setting the expectations for everybody at the table to make sure that you have a really good time. It also, I found, has the effect of kind of getting everybody on the same page as far as their characters and the kind of game everyone wants to play. If they want to play something that's a little goofier, everybody knows that up front. You don't have one person showing up with a joke character and everybody else has got super serious characters, or vice versa. Um, it kind of gets everybody on the same page before you're at a place where it's harder to make changes to the characters, or somebody ends up playing a character that really wasn't set up for this style of gameplay, and now they're not having a good time and they want to swap out that character for you. So session zeros are just a great way to really kind of, level that playing field and get everybody on the same page to get started, and ensure that you're set up to have a really great time, whether you're playing a one shot or a campaign. So that about brings us to our time here. Is there any other questions from anybody who's watching here today about session zeros and what sorts of things you might want to include in them, or why you might want to run them, or are there circumstances when you don't want to run a session zero or anything along those lines? I'd love to get those questions if you've got them. I know we're on a little bit of a delay here, so I'll give everybody kind of a few moments to type that out if you have them, and then otherwise we'll start wrapping up as we're reaching our half-hour mark here. Um, in the meantime, I will remind everybody that I do live stream on Mondays as well. If you haven't checked that out, that is where we are building an ongoing campaign, really doing all of the details on them. That live stream isn't like a lot of the write your first campaign videos where they kind of do a step by step and it's a very cursory sort of summary of everything. Now this is the real thing in real time. You see the warts and all that kind of deal, going through my whole creative process, and it has the benefit of I get all the input from you guys who come up with such amazing ideas. I really encourage you, if you want to learn a little bit about how to write campaigns and adventures, and want to be involved in the creative process, or just want somebody to chat with while you're doing your own game prep, to come join me on Monday evenings, 6 p.m. Central Time if you're in the US. And those run for about an hour or so. Likewise, I do these videos every Wednesday. And so if you've got topics you want me to chat about, or questions you might have that you want me to explore and give you my feedback on, my advice on, please let me know. I'm always looking for ideas for that. So thank you so much. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions in the chat here today, so I guess we'll go ahead and get wrapped up. Again, thank you for joining me here today. Thank you for a great 2024, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful 2025 with everybody here as well. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff helps the channel grow and helps me keep doing this. Thanks again, and I'll see you all on Monday.